Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming along this morning. I'm going to be talking about evaluating open science. I'm the research support Sub-Librarian in Ulster University, based in the Jordanstown campus. These are some of the things I'll be talking about as we go through the next 20 minutes. Why we need to measure research outputs. I'll be looking at a bit more detail in quantitative metrics and qualitative metrics. I'll be looking at relatively new development of responsible metrics and new approaches to evaluating research outputs and the future of evaluation at the end. So why do we need to measure research impact? Basically, there's lots of different stakeholders around who want to know what's happening with research outputs. So we're looking at funders, institutions, individual and groups of academics are looking, and publishers want to know what's happening with research outputs. Is the research being communicated effectively? Is the research making an impact? Who's it influencing? And there's issues around, can we benchmark against competitors or collaborators? As you've heard from previous speakers, scholarly communications is a quickly fast-changing world. So we're moving away from the traditional formats of journals and conference proceedings and book chapters and theses to the whole array of online literature, reports, patents, official documents, web-based material like blogs and social media, artists using multimedia and different exhibitions. How do we evaluate those sorts of things? Some of the other sort of research outputs like software and data sets, and the multiplicity of different sites available now. So it's not just publisher websites, we're looking at institutional and subject repositories too. Within libraries, research evaluation is quite a fast-moving and developing issue at the minute. There's a number of libraries involved in different aspects of research evaluation, and we're doing it in slightly different ways. And these are some of the ways that libraries are involved in evaluating research output. So we're not just subscribing, training and analysing the citation basis for the traditional bibliometric side of things. We are looking at the research analytics tools that are built on top of the citation databases, not only paying for them very often, but training people to use them, analysing the data and producing reports for different people within the institutions. Lots of us are managing and promoting institutional and other subject repositories. We're generating reports on usage and feeding this back to researchers and to the admin people within the institutions. We're managing and promoting good practice in relation to researcher profiles, which I'll be talking about in a few minutes, helping researchers can get their data management plans right at the beginning of their research, helping with impact planning, and working with research administrators on evaluation policy. When we're measuring impact, there's the two main ways. I'll be talking about some of these in a bit more detail. There's the quantitative side, which is revolving around traditional bibliometrics based on citation data. We'll be talking about metrics, alternative metrics, and usage metrics, and we'll be looking a bit at developments within qualitative evaluation too. And I've just got some screenshots of a couple of good websites. I'm not going to be going into huge detail with how bibliometrics, how they all work and how they are calculated. But if you want to go into a bit more detail, you can look at the MyRI website, which has really good information on all of this kind of data, and also the Metrics Toolkit website with case studies and that sort of thing too. Traditional bibliometrics have been around since the 1960s. The one that you might have heard of in the past is the journal impact factor, developed by ISI, and you can find that in Web of Science and journal citation reports. In there you can find citations and journal impact metrics, which are based on a 2-year output window. And traditionally these were used to help make decisions for librarians on what journals to subscribe to. But since then they've become a sort of proxy, an indicator of journal quality. Whether that's right or wrong is very much open to question, but that's the way they've been looked at in recent years. Also within Web of Science you can find something called eigenfactor, which looks at the same sort of citation data, but on a 5-year window rather than a 2-year window. And the whole field of journal impact metrics has developed a lot in recent years. Since Scopus came online, there's 3 different journal impact metrics available in Scopus. You can look at something called Site Score, which looks at articles over a 3-year window and their citations. Something called SNP, Source Normalized Impact per Paper. Another different way of looking at impact based on different subject areas, which work in different ways depending on the subject. And another one called the SJR, which looks at journal rankings on something based on the Google PageRank algorithm. And then some scholars would be looking in Google Scholar as well, and they have their own metrics available hidden away in a menu there. One of them is called the H5 index, a 5-year window of outputs and citations. And as I mentioned a couple of slides ago, there's research analytic tools available. The main one that's around in Irish-based universities is called SciVal, which is based on Scopus data. There's another one available to some people called Insights, based on Web of Science data. And these are used to analyse and compare not just individuals, but groups of researchers, institutions, countries, different subject areas, and publication sets as well. And when these are analysed, you can then create reports with nice graphics in them based on loads of different metrics. But there are some limitations to bibliometrics, so I've listed some of them here. High citation counts, for example, you may be aware, aren't always a sign of quality. Bad research can get cited. Bibliometrics can reduce everything to a simple number, which is sometimes an easy option, but not always the best option. Very often you're having to supply lots of context, if possible, to the bibliometrics to make them understandable. There's huge subject differences in different areas. Medical science works in a very different way to arts and humanities, for example, when it comes to citations. We spend a lot of time fixing errors in researcher profiles in Scopus and Web of Science. Sometimes these can come from the outputs themselves, but sometimes from the added value information in the databases, because a lot of it is done by machine learning. When you're looking at large amounts of citations, sometimes you can get really high citation figures or very low ones, which can distort the figure, so it's good to try and get averages if possible. And it's also good to try and normalize things across different subject areas and across different types of media as well, because journal outputs will differ from conference proceedings, for example. And these limitations have led to some dissatisfaction with bibliometrics. So increasingly, journal metrics, journal impact factors have been used not just for the journal titles themselves, but used to measure articles and individuals. There's something around called the H index, which you'll see quite a lot in some of these databases I've been talking about for individual researchers. And there's been a lot of criticism about this. It's quite arbitrary. It can be strongly biased against early career researchers. There can be a gender bias, biases within certain subject areas, and it doesn't always highlight highly cited outputs either. So these dissatisfaction with these and new technologies have led to some new methods of research evaluation. And a lot of these are termed under the name alternative metrics or altmetrics. And you can see these in social networks, the number of likes or mentions that something gets, social tagging in things like Mendeley. You can count comments and mentions in blogs, for example. Mentions in online news items, again, whether they're positive or negative, is sometimes not counted in the figures, but we're getting data through for that sort of thing. And the two most common companies involved in altmetrics are one called Altmetric, that donut that you see at the top, and the other one is called PlumX or Plum Analytics, which you'll often see embedded into repositories and things like Scopus Web of Science. So there are a lot of positives about this developing field of altmetrics. It can be very, very fast compared to the citation areas. Citations can take years sometimes to accrue, but altmetrics can be happen overnight as soon as something is available online. It's broad-based, so it's not just measuring the academic world and the academic outputs, it's measuring everything. And it is diverse, covering all types of outputs, not just traditional journals, conference proceedings and books. It's not perfect. Altmetrics can be gamed, just like citations can be as well. It's harder to gather standardized data about them. There's patchy coverage between different subject areas and different countries throughout the world, and not all the data can be easily accessed and shared for comparisons and interoperability. So in general, it's best to treat altmetric figures as broad indicators. You need to go behind the figures to have a look at really what's happening. Lying somewhere between these are usage-based metrics, and you'll see these quite often embedded into repositories and open data platforms. And these are measuring things like the number of views something's had or the number of downloads. And they can be quite good at capturing the bigger picture, because you're not measuring where somebody has cited something in another paper, for example. You're looking at the number of times that has been viewed or downloaded, so you're capturing an awful lot more sometimes than just citations. Not everything a researcher reads is referenced, and it's useful for traditional publications, but also for lots of the new forms of media that are coming out online as well. When it comes to qualitative analysis, peer review is the most common form and has been in use traditionally for a long time. Basically, expert opinion in your subject area. But again, there's problems with that. It can be subjective. It can be a very slow process for researchers. But new developments recently have made it a little bit more democratic and collaborative and interdisciplinary. One of the examples of this sort of thing that's going on within the UK is the REF impact case study or impact statements, which gives like a narrative form of metrics and lots of other things besides. So I've just pulled out some headlines from a typical case study. So we're looking at the summary of the impact, the underpinning research, things like that up there that you can see. And it's basically measuring not just citations, but a lot of awareness and understanding about the research, potential attitudes, cultural change, policy changes, that sort of thing. All of those sorts of impact are being trying to be measured and captured within a case study and an impact statement. So the dissemination itself isn't the impact. The impact is, what actually happens to the research, the knock-on effects of it, not just the pathway to impact. And a lot of the things that I've been talking about have led to movements in recent years relating to the responsible metrics, preventing the use and abuse of research metrics. And the ones that you might have heard of, the most prominent one at the top there is the San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, something that Connell signed up to in February. The Leiden Manifesto, coming from the Netherlands, and the Metric Tide, which was a bit of work done after REF 2014, the last round of REF in the UK, looking at good practice around metrics, not to rely on just one metric, to use a variety where possible, and not to use metrics for purposes they're not intended for. The establishment of these frameworks have led to something called next generation metrics. So within the European Commission, one of the 8 pillars of open science is next generation metrics. And these are some of the things I've taken out of the European Commission statement regarding metrics, that it should be grounded. Open science should be grounded in a mix of expert judgment, both quantitative and qualitative. Transparency and accuracy are crucial. We need to make better use of the existing metrics, but maybe need to develop new metrics as well. And they need to be all open, transparent, and in a linked data infrastructure for easy sharing. And we need to measure what matters. And they're seeing metrics as playing 2 crucial roles in support of open science, monitoring the development of the scientific system towards openness at all levels. And a good example of this is the innovation for open citations, like freely available citations with lots of publishers getting involved, all done via something called Crossref. So it's a good example of something coming out in recent times. And then the other role of metrics in open science is to measure performance in order to reward improved ways of working as a researcher, not only at an individual level, but group level. Because traditionally it's been based on citations and what journal you publish in and that kind of thing. So we're trying to move away from that. And a good example is the Science in Transition initiative in the Netherlands, where teamwork is rewarded, for example, as well as societal impact. The League of European Research Universities has made some recommendations on next generation metrics, and they are advocating that institutions should develop bibliometrics policy based on the principles of the Leiden Manifesto, one of those 3 big developments, DORA, Leiden and Metric Tide. The culture change needs to happen around research assessment. We need to embed new forms of research evaluation within institutions to reward promotions and good research. There needs to be guidance around for research administrators and academics on good and bad practice in the use of bibliometrics and developing new metrics. And this needs to be rolled out in particular to junior researchers, who are the ones who are going to be most impacted by this change of culture around the idea of open science and responsible use of metrics. For the next funding round, post-Horizon 2020, the European Commission makes these recommendations. They want some clear guidelines for the use of responsible metrics. I'm not going through all of these. I'll just highlight that they want ORCIDs, which is an individual researcher profile that's freely available to researchers and everybody else. They want that to be mandatory. They want reduced emphasis on the journal impact factor and encourage other metrics. And they want to develop a European forum for next generation metrics. So just to conclude, we need to look at appropriate metrics to support qualitative evaluation. We need to use a basket of metrics approach instead of highlighting one or two metrics where possible. A better understanding of alt metrics is required, and open metrics need to go a little bit further than what we have at the minute. They need to be fully open, transparent and reusable. We need to promote qualitative evaluation methodologies, librarians embedding themselves into research groups with best practice and good ideas for that sort of thing, offering support and advice on pathways to impact. And we need metrics that not only measure, but incentivize and reward open science. And I've got a list of useful information here. If you want to go in and explore any of these in a bit more detail, when these slides are up and available online, you'll be able to follow some of these up. So thank you very much.